There was a moment quiet, almost invisible, when everything I believed about money began to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle realization that something wasn't adding up. I was doing everything right, working hard, earning steadily, upgrading my life step by step, and yet there was a weight, a pressure that never left. Like I was running on a treadmill that only sped up the longer I stayed on it. Have you ever felt that? That strange gap between effort and freedom. We're taught from the beginning, study hard, get a good job, earn more. But no one stops to ask what happens after that, because earning more doesn't automatically mean keeping more. And keeping more doesn't guarantee growing more. That was the first uncomfortable truth I had to face. The lesson that changed my life didn't arrive as motivation, it arrived as disruption. It forced me to question everything I thought I knew. What if the problem wasn't how much I earned, but how I understood money itself? That question stayed with me. It followed me into every decision, every purchase, every goal, and slowly it began to reshape the way I saw the world. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come to inspire you, they come to interrupt you. And once you truly see the truth, you can't go back to who you were before. Most people don't realize they're stuck. That's the dangerous part, not the struggle itself, but the illusion that everything is fine. You wake up, go to work, earn money, spend it, repeat. It feels normal, it feels safe, it even feels successful at times. But underneath that routine, there's a silent cycle, one that keeps repeating without progress. You see, being broke isn't always about having no money. Sometimes it's about having money that never stays, money that comes in and disappears just as quickly. And the worst part, society celebrates this cycle: new phone, success, bigger house, achievement, luxury lifestyle. You've made it, but no one shows you the invisible chains behind those choices, because what looks like progress can actually be a trap. I remember realizing that I wasn't moving forward. I was just upgrading my expenses. Every raise I got didn't make me freer. It made me busier. Every new purchase didn't reduce stress. It increased responsibility. And suddenly I had to confront a hard truth. What if the life I was building was quietly keeping me stuck? That realization isn't comfortable. It challenges your identity, your decisions, even your dreams. But awareness is where freedom begins. Because you cannot escape a cycle you don't even see. The difference between an asset and a liability is not just a financial concept. It's a lens, a way of seeing the world that most people never develop. And without it, every decision you make about money becomes a guess. Here's the truth that changed everything for me. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out. Simple, almost too simple, but simplicity is what makes it powerful, because once you understand this, everything changes. That car you wanted so badly, does it pay you, or do you pay for it every month? That house you're proud of, is it generating income or demanding expenses? We've been conditioned to label things incorrectly, to call liabilities investments just because they look impressive. And that confusion keeps people trapped for years, sometimes for life. When I first understood this, I felt a mix of clarity and regret. Clarity, because things finally made sense. Regret, because I realized how many decisions I had made without this awareness. But then came empowerment, because now every choice had a filter, a question: is this helping me or costing me? And that question became my guide, not just in money, but in life, because what you allow into your life either builds you or burdens you. We don't just buy things, we buy feelings, status, validation, belonging, and that's exactly how society quietly guides us into making decisions that don't serve us. From the moment we're young, we're shown what success looks like. It's not explained, it's displayed. Big houses, expensive cars, perfect lifestyles, and without realizing it, we start chasing those images. But here's the truth no one tells you. Those images are often built on liabilities. We're encouraged to spend before we understand, to upgrade before we stabilize, to impress before we secure, and the result, a life that looks successful but feels heavy. I remember the moment I caught myself wanting something not because I needed it, not because it added value, but because it would make me look successful. That was a turning point because I realized I wasn't making decisions, I was following a script, and once you see that script you have a choice. To keep playing the role or to rewrite it, because real success is not about what others see, it's about what your life feels like when no one is watching. Looking rich is easy. In today's world, it's easier than ever. Credit is available. Trends are everywhere. And appearances can be created in seconds, but being rich is a completely different story because looking rich is about spending. Being rich is about sustaining. One gives you attention, the other gives you freedom. I used to think they were the same. That if I could just reach a certain level of lifestyle, everything would fall into place. But the truth is, the more I tried to look successful, the further I drifted from actual security. Because every upgrade came with a hidden cost, more pressure, more responsibility, more dependence on income. And that's when it hit me. If your lifestyle depends entirely on your effort, you're not free, you're committed. There's nothing wrong with enjoying life, but there's a difference between enjoyment and illusion, because illusion fades. And when it does, what remains is reality. So the question becomes, are you building a life that can sustain itself? Or one that needs constant maintenance just to survive? We're told that a higher salary is the answer, that if we just earn more, everything will fall into place. But here's the uncomfortable truth: income alone does not create wealth. It creates opportunity and sometimes even more problems. Because without understanding how money works, a higher salary simply gives you the ability to make bigger mistakes. I remember chasing income like it was the ultimate goal. Promotions, raises, better opportunities. I thought each step would bring me closer to freedom. But instead, it brought me closer to pressure, because as my income increased, so did my expenses, my expectations, my commitments, and suddenly I wasn't freer. I was more dependent than ever. That's the trap no one warns you about. A salary can fund your life, but it cannot secure your future, because the moment you stop working, the income stops too. And that's when the real question hits. Have you built something that continues without you, or have you built a life that only survives because of you? There's nothing wrong with earning well, but if income is your only strategy, you're building on something temporary. Wealth isn't about how much you make, it's about how much works for you even when you don't. And once you understand that, your focus begins to shift. From earning more to owning more. Everything changes the moment your thinking changes, not your income, not your environment, your thinking. Because the way you see money determines the way you use it, and the way you use it determines your future. Most people think like consumers. Even when they earn more, they spend more. Even when they grow, their habits don't. But those who build wealth think differently. They don't ask, what can I buy? They ask, what can this become? That one shift, small on the surface, creates a completely different life over time. I had to train myself to pause before every decision, not to restrict myself, but to redirect myself. Because every dollar has a direction. It either moves toward comfort or toward freedom, and the truth is, comfort feels good in the moment. It's easy, it's rewarding, but freedom requires discipline, it requires patience, it requires saying no to things that don't align with your future. That's not always easy, but it is always worth it, because in the end, your life is not shaped by what you earn. It's shaped by what you repeatedly choose, and your choices begin with your thinking. Most people spend their lives working for money. They trade time for income day after day, year after year. And while there's nothing wrong with working hard, there's a limit to how far that alone can take you. Because time is finite, you only have so many hours in a day. So if your income depends entirely on your time, your growth has a ceiling. That realization changes everything because it forces you to ask a different question. What can I build that works even when I don't? That's the moment you stop chasing money and start designing systems. Money that works for you doesn't require your constant presence. It doesn't need you to show up every single day to survive. It continues, it grows, it compounds, and at first it feels slow, almost invisible, but over time it becomes powerful. I remember the shift. It wasn't instant success. It was a gradual release, a sense that I wasn't carrying everything alone anymore, that something was beginning to support me. And that's the goal, not to escape work entirely, but to create balance, where your effort builds something that continues beyond your effort. Because real progress begins when your money starts working harder than you do. There are two ways of thinking that shape two completely different lives, and the difference isn't intelligence. It isn't luck, it's perspective. One mindset sees money as something to spend, the other sees it as something to grow. One focuses on immediate satisfaction, the other focuses on long-term impact. Neither feels right or wrong in the moment. But over time, the results become undeniable. I used to make decisions based on how they made me feel now. If something brought excitement, I justified it. If it gave me a sense of success, I pursued it, but feelings are temporary. And decisions based only on feelings often lead to outcomes you didn't intend. The shift happens when you begin to think beyond the moment. When you start asking not just what do I want today, but what will this mean for me tomorrow, that question creates awareness. And awareness creates control, because once you begin to see the long-term impact of short-term choices, your priorities begin to change. And slowly, so does your life. Assets are not always obvious. They don't always look impressive. In fact, many of them look small, simple, even boring at first glance. But that's what makes them powerful, because while others are chasing attention, assets are quietly building stability. An asset doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be seen. It simply needs to function, and the more it functions, the more it grows. The challenge is learning to recognize them, because in a world full of noise, we're drawn to what stands out, not necessarily to what works. I had to retrain my eyes to look beyond appearance and focus on behavior. Does this bring value over time? Does this create something beyond the moment? Those questions became my filter. And once you start seeing assets clearly, opportunities begin to appear everywhere, not as distractions, but as decisions. Because every asset you build becomes a step toward independence, and every step matters. There's a quiet danger that comes with earning more. It doesn't feel like a threat, it feels like progress. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it happens so subtly you barely notice it. You earn more, so you spend more. You upgrade your habits, your surroundings, your expectations, and before you realize it, your new lifestyle becomes your new normal. And with it, your expenses rise, your freedom doesn't expand, it tightens, because now you need to maintain this new level just to feel stable. I've been there, feeling like I was moving forward when in reality I was just raising the bar I had to keep up with. And the problem isn't growth, the problem is direction, because if your growth is only visible in what you spend, not in what you build, you're not progressing. You're cycling. Breaking that cycle requires awareness and sometimes restraint, not because you can't afford something, but because you choose something better, something lasting. Education shapes everything, but not all education is equal. We spend years learning how to work, but very little time learning how money works. And that gap creates confusion. Because without financial understanding, even smart people make poor financial decisions. Not because they lack ability, but because they lack awareness. I used to think education ended with school. That once I had a job, I had everything I needed. But real education begins when you start asking questions that weren't taught. How does money grow? How does it move? How does it multiply? Those questions changed my direction, Because once you begin to understand money, you stop reacting to it and start guiding it. And that's when control begins, not through luck, but through learning. Passive income is often misunderstood. People think it means doing nothing, but that's not the truth. Passive income is built through active effort. It requires time, energy, and consistency at the beginning. But over time, it gives something back. It creates space, and that space is what most people are truly searching for. Not just money, but time, time to think, time to live, time to choose, and that's what makes passive income powerful. Not because it replaces work, but because it redefines it. It allows you to step back without everything falling apart. And that changes how you experience life, because when your time is no longer fully traded, it becomes available. And availability creates possibility. Small investments don't feel significant in the moment. They seem too small to matter, too slow to notice. But that's the illusion, because growth doesn't always announce itself. It builds quietly and consistently. The problem is, we often underestimate what small actions can become over time. We look for big results and ignore small beginnings. But every large outcome starts with something small, a decision, a step, a commitment, and once that begins, momentum follows. Not instantly, but inevitably. The key is staying consistent long enough to see the result, because consistency turns effort into progress, and progress into transformation. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't just a financial situation, it's a pattern, and patterns repeat until they are changed. The challenge is, it often feels normal, even expected, but normal doesn't mean permanent. Change begins with awareness, with recognizing that something isn't working, and then choosing to approach it differently, not drastically, but deliberately, because breaking a cycle doesn't require perfection, it requires consistency, one better decision at a time. And over time, those decisions begin to reshape your reality, because your life follows your patterns, and your patterns follow your choices. Not everything that matters needs to be seen. In fact, some of the most important progress happens quietly. While others chase recognition, real growth happens in the background, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but deeply impactful. Because it's not built for attention, it's built for stability, and stability doesn't need applause. It needs consistency. That's the difference, because when you focus on building instead of showing, your results begin to speak for themselves. Not immediately, but eventually, and when they do, they last. Every change begins with a decision, not a big one, a simple one, a shift in direction, because your future isn't shaped by one moment. It's shaped by repeated moments, and each one carries weight. So the question becomes, what direction are your decisions taking you? Toward temporary comfort or lasting freedom? Because both require effort, but only one creates independence. And once you see that clearly, the choice becomes easier, not easier to make, but easier to understand. There is one rule that changes everything, not overnight, but over time. It's simple, but powerful, and once you understand it, you begin to see life differently. Not through appearance, but through function, not through noise, but through clarity, because in the end, it's not about how much you have. It's about what your life allows you to do, and that's what makes the difference, not just in money, but in meaning, because when your choices align with your future, everything begins to change quietly, powerfully, permanently.